look, country, we have to budget and we're overspending. Look at the national debt. This is outrageous. And I think it can be easy for the average American citizen to not really grasp why that's a problem. So let me just give you an example. I would say most homeowners take out a pretty significant mortgage when they first get started, and they have a negative net worth, like maybe that first day after they get that mortgage. And it was worth it for me to do that. I'll pay it off over the 15 or 30 year stint, but it was worth leveraging having that debt on the books to get this great good, namely raising my family in a nice home. Why is that not the case at the national level? Like, aren't there some goods that it's worth going into debt for in order to enjoy? Like, we still have to live our lives right now, and we need these goods. Let's get them, even if it costs us some debt. Now, the comeback is, I guess the question is, how much is too much debt? Are we at that breaking point? Where's that threshold where you're now unequivocally, you're over leveraged and there's no chance to pay it back? Are we close to that? Are we tiptoeing? Can you just kind of sort through this morass of topics for us?
Well, think about it. In 2010, the country said that $10 trillion of debt was too much. That was 2010. And I ran on a platform. 94 Republicans were elected. I think it was 94, because we said we were not going to let the national debt get out of hand. Today, the national debt is at 30 trillion, 10 years later. That's why I call it the lost decade, because Republicans lost the opportunity to fix things when it was 10 trillion. Now, nobody wants to talk about it today. In fact, yesterday, it just came out that we have a record deficit in the history of the United States, $3.1 trillion this year, higher than any other year in history. The highest before that was 1.4 or 1.6 trillion under Barack Obama. And we crucified President Obama for having a deficit of 1.4 or 1.6. Now,
COVID.
What's that?
COVID led to a lot of that, right? The stimulus package.
We were already on track for 1.5 to 1.6 trillion. All we did was add even more. So we were already going to have record deficits this year because nobody's paying attention and nobody cares. And like I heard this morning, which was interesting from a congressman I was talking to, Mitch McConnell has said you'll never lose an election by spending money. So you can spend and spend and spend, and the American people aren't paying attention to it. But let's take your example of the house. You buy a $200,000 house and you put a $180,000 mortgage on it. Well, you haven't leveraged the family because you still have a $200,000 home. As long as that home doesn't collapse in value and go down to $150,000, you could sell it and get your money back and pay that debt off. But what we're doing in Washington is we're leveraging against no assets. So we're leveraging trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars on stimulus, for instance. And you mentioned that, the stimulus package. Great example. We just put out $2 or $3 trillion worth of stimulus money. Well, here's the problem. Once that's burned up, you don't have an asset.
Yeah. And
they'll say, well, you have the economy. Well, it didn't work because the economy is still struggling. So these are the kind of assets in business. If you're a business person, a businessman or woman, you might spend some money to help grow things, but you're not going to put out, a third of your spending just try and grow something. So are we in trouble? Sure, we're in trouble. The Comptroller General, a lot of people don't even know that the United States has a Comptroller General, appointed by Barack Obama in 2008, I believe. He's got a 20-year appointment. Sat in my office, said, Congressman Renacci, I'm glad that you're talking about the deficit. We all should be talking about it. We will be in a Greece-like situation within 20 years. That was in 2012. He said that. So we're 8 years into the 20 years. A Greece-like situation, if anybody in your that's listening to this understands what a Greece-like situation is. Yeah. I mean, Greece is basically is totally in debt, owes money to every country around it, and it has a financial calamity in its economy. Well, that's exactly where we could be. That's exactly where the Comptroller General is saying. So why shouldn't we be spending this money? Because anytime you spend more money than you're bringing in, you're taxing people in the future. So think about it from that standpoint. Because that money has to be paid back. Some of it's owed to China, which is another problem. And then people say, well, that's a small amount. You know, it's just $2 trillion that's owed to China. Okay, they're right. But guess where the rest of it's owed to? Anytime you buy a treasury bill that you think's solid and backed by the federal government, it's backed by a deficit because that's what you're doing. You're buying treasuries. You're buying debt. You're buying federal debt.
U.S. futures.
Right. So in the end, if you buy $1,000 treasury bill, that treasury bill, if the federal government can't pay that back sometime, your treasury bill is worthless. So do you want your family to own treasury bills that could be worthless in 20 years? No. And that's the problem.
So yeah, would you say, like, just to really crystallize the issue for people, is it the case that there will come a time, maybe it's in 12 years, as the controller predicted, that it would not be a wise investment for anyone to buy another U.S. bond or treasury bill? And then where is the U.S. going to find extra money to pay off or to get these goods if we're still running a deficit? Like, the bonds market will collapse eventually. Is that what is ultimately wrong?
So here's what people would tell you. So right now, though the United States is in $28 trillion to $30 trillion worth of debt, we're still better off than most countries in the world. The day that most countries in the world are better than off than us is the day the United States economy will be in deep trouble. So that day will come at some point in time. Like, here's the best example, Canada. Canada, who was in a big deficit and debt situation, paid off all its debt and put an austerity program in 10 or 15 years ago. So today, Canada doesn't have any debt, or the debt they have is manageable. So they're in much better shape than the United States today. And that's where we need to be concerned, because as we look around at our allies and other countries, when their debt becomes better than our debt to buy or invest in, and people would rather invest in theirs, and they say, you know what, I want to cash in my treasuries, and I want to buy Canada treasuries. I'll just use that as an example. The federal government's not going to have the cash to do it. That's when the federal government has problems.